Chapter 1. Bowling. When my twins were in morning preschool, I took one of them out for a special outing each week to bond with my son and daughter separately for a few hours. Some fraternal twins complain about being viewed as a two-pack, not as individuals, and I went so far as to have separate birthday cakes for them on their birthday. On Friday morning, I pulled my almost 5-year-old daughter out of preschool and took her to a bowling alley. Bowling balls rumbled down lanes, classic rock music played in the background, and the aroma of French fries wafted past. A gum-chewing man with thinning hair assigned us a lane where no one was bowling on either side. Other bowlers were in their 60s and 70s with gray hair. We put on bowling shoes and picked out balls, hefting them in our hands. We threw mostly gutter balls, but a few wobbled down the wooden lane, knocking down pins. We raised our hands and cheered. A group farther down roared when someone got a strike, and my gaze flicked away to them. But when I looked back at my daughter, she was slowly walking down the greased lane, holding a bowling ball. She was 8 feet from the marked line, moving closer to the pins, and I called for her to come back. She glanced back at me. The ball fell out of her hands, rolling into the gutter, and her feet slipped out from under her. The music stopped, and the bowling alley suddenly was quiet. People gasped. Bowlers who were about to bowl stood staring at us. No one moved. Flat on the floor, she crawled on the slick surface toward me, having a tough time making little progress. I ventured out to her, treading with my arms out, as if skating on ice, but I fell, smacking my hip on the hard maple floor and letting out a groan. She inched forward like a worm wiggling on a wet road, and I swam on the slick surface to where she held out a hand. Grasping her and holding her close, I scooted backwards on my butt. People watched, open-mouthed, gaping at what must never happen in a bowling alley. We made it back to the line one must not cross when throwing a ball, and wiped our greasy palms on our pants. The music started, and bowlers bowled, knocking down pins with a clatter and whoops of joy. We finished our game, and years later, on a 4th-grade field trip, my daughter bowled the best in her group. But she didn't care. She'd had enough of bowling. Looking back, I wonder why I didn't go in the gutter to rescue her. But I lost common sense in the commotion, and was struck by myopia in the moment. Chapter 2. How was your day? I tromped through the front door of the house on South Beacon Hill in Seattle, threw down my purse and sighed. My curly-haired husband watched me and asked about my day. I groaned and complained about office drama but noticed he was quiet. "What about you? How was your day?" He blinked back tears. "We ran out of body bags at the hospital today." I bit my lower lip. He continued. "I took a dead person down in the elevator with a white sheet over their body, and other people got in." My hands flopped down at my sides. "I'm sorry. How awful." After that, I hope I curtailed my whining about my work, because dealing with death and dying and disease is much more important than a senator's grandson reading the Wall Street Journal all day. His job mattered, and mine was a mere speck on the ocean. Chapter 3. Lead Dust. I tromped up the cement steps to the 2-bedroom house in Seattle, where the babysitter was watching my 2-year-old twins. The front door was closed, the windows shut, and no one was playing outside, which was odd on a warm September afternoon. A loud noise next door whirred and buzzed. When I went inside, the babysitter took me aside. "We are playing inside," she said, wiping her brow, "because something's going on next door. They started sanding and dust was flying everywhere, all over the deck. So we came in until they're finished." I went out to see the neighbor, who had mentioned this project, and told me he'd tell me ahead of time before he sanded the exterior of his house with 5 layers of old paint. Doctors told us our daughter could not be exposed to dust, and inhaling it might put her in the hospital, because she had so little lung function left. The neighbor turned off the sander and shrugged, saying he might take a few weeks to get the job done. The babysitter left, and my husband came home and called his parents, asking if we could stay a few weeks until the sanding next door was finished. They invited us over, and I wondered if they regretted that offer, because our children were loud and rambunctious, running through their quiet home. The sanding continued. I called a government agency, but they arrived to inspect the flying dust when the workers were on lunch break. I took a video of the dust flying, but I was told there was no precedents or state laws that prohibited the pollution. I took swabs of the dust on our deck and other spots, which turned out to have a high level of contamination, with parts per million at a level seen in Superfund sites. I hired an independent lab, and their tests confirmed the high levels of lead in the dust and the soil. The state of Washington had no laws on the books at that time, like Massachusetts had, requiring contamination of work areas when sanding exteriors of houses. A dog a block down died when another house with old paint was sanded, from padding through fouled soil on his property. We lived with my in-laws who were in their 70s, with my bickering, joyous fraternal twins for 7 months. The babysitter quit because it took 2 buses to reach us. Sales at my pottery shop and small art gallery plummeted. I hired a lead abatement company to come in and remove the contamination, which spread in our house when the furnace kicked on in cooler weather, sucking in outside air and blowing particles all around. Our insurance company decided to cover part of the lead abatement cost. I spoke with the owners of a daycare in a home behind us, because their backyard was also exposed to flying lead dust from sanding down layers of old lead paint. But they shrugged. The one-eyed roofer and his wife had bigger concerns, like raising a grandchild and running a daycare out of their home. The whole thing riled me up, and I met with 4 lawyers to make it right. Items in our home were tossed in a dumpster when they couldn't be completely cleaned, like my husband's boots and the quilt I took 5 years to sew, and a Hudson Bay blanket where I'd embroidered on the corner. 3 lawyers turned me down and said there was no precedent on our state for such a lawsuit. The final and 4th lawyer was eager to take the case on contingency, but then he called and said in a sad voice, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but I can't take the case." "Why not?" "The other party is wealthy, and they threaten to sue you. It's not a matter of who is right, but who has the most money. We need to let this go. If your name was Nordstrom, we'd purse this case." I hung up the phone and gazed at my children playing on a jungle gym in my in-laws' daylight basement. Justice wasn't available in our state. I'd have to let it go. But my fingers itched to take a swing at them, the couple who ruined our lives and caused us to spend over $100,000 in lead abatement bills, not including the cost of replacing tossed-out belongings. A neighbor told me the neighborhood sided against us. They thought we were crazy and making a big deal out of nothing. It was just dust, and we should have shrugged it off. I frowned, hearing that, and suggested to my husband that we sell the house when it was lead abated and certified as cleaned up and a healthy place to live. Over a foot of contaminated dirt was dug up from the yard and tossed in a dumpster, hauled off to a biohazardous waste site, but the neighbors thought we were weird. I wondered last year about the children at the daycare next door, but we'll never know if or how the dust affected their health and development. Curious about the homeowners who caused the chaos in our small lives, I searched online. The wife of the sander was pregnant and living in the home across the narrow alley while their house was sanded. Online, I found a post by her about having serious health issues, but I don't know if they were connected to the layers of lead dust flying in the air. But it does make me wonder if it all came back to bite them in the end. Chapter 4. Brown Cow. A long-legged boy leaned on the counter, sipping a concoction in a tall glass. He looked to be about a year older than me, and I was about 8. My grandmother belonged to a small country club by a lake, and I had been sent to day camp there, where other campers already knew each other. In swimming class, I was told to doggy paddle from one side of the pool to the other. When I finished swimming, I hopped out and sat on a bar stool, ordering a brown cow with vanilla ice cream and root beer. The older boy beside me spoke with the man behind the counter, but not to other campers. I hadn't seen him in activities. He was aloof, as if he was from a distant planet but forced to share gravity on Earth with the rest of us. Years later, a young man introduced himself to me at a high school cafeteria table. He wore a red and white striped shirt, and his brown eyes exuded warmth, making me feel I met a friend. I figured out he was the stranger who sat beside me after swim class. Two outcasts perched on bar stools. He lived there when his parents managed the club. Chapter 5. Opera. In Rome, Italy, I wanted to go to the opera, but my stomach growled with hunger, so I stopped at a mostly empty restaurant and ate delicious pasta. Paying the bill, I left and examined a map as traffic roared by. Walking down a few blocks, I stopped at a street corner and looked around, but couldn't see a sign for the opera. A group of men in white tails stood outside on the sidewalk, and I went over and asked a man in white tails, "Dove opera?" His eyes lit up and he smiled, motioning for me to follow him inside. I slipped through a side door and sat down on a hard seat. The man in white tails picked up a trumpet and played, just like my boyfriend did back home. He'd brought me through the musician's entrance to see the second half of Tosca, an opera by Puccini. Music swept over the audience, opera singers belted out beautiful notes, and a chill ran up my spine. I shivered and smiled as goosebumps pricked my flesh, having ended up exactly where I wanted to be. Chapter 6. Special Delivery. The crisp smell of fall was in the air, and high school classes in our suburb of Detroit had started. Harry's letter arrived special delivery, and I opened it with shaking hands. He was older than I was and lived in a small city in Ontario, 2.5 hours away. I looked at the letter but didn't understand the dots and dashes, so I took it to my babysitting job on the next block. The father greeted me at the door and asked how I was. I said, "My boyfriend sent a letter, but I think it might be in code." He smiled. "Do you have it with you? I'll take a look. I was in the Navy." I handed him the letter, and the father read it, rubbing his chin. He gave it back and said, "It's in Morse code. He said he loves you." I bit my lip because I was 16 and we met during a difficult summer, where a tragic accident made us all quieter and the voice of death hung heavy in our hearts. Something about the way the father of the kids I was babysitting looked at me gave me the feeling the letter might have said more than he let on. I wrote Harry back, telling him about classes but didn't say I loved him. He wrote about training to be an electrician and asked me to move to Canada. We could get married. My mouth went dry when I read that. I wasn't ready to take that huge step. My father got wind of the first letter and the second. He said in a stern voice, "He's pressuring you. He's older than you and in a different place in life. Plus, he's poor. What would you live on? Is that the life you want to have? But Dad, end it with him and finish high school. Don't make a rash choice you'll regret later on." I sent Harry a letter breaking up with him, but he showed up at our front door one afternoon a week later, looking pale and thin. I stood behind the screen door and didn't invite him in. He put his hands together, blue eyes staring, and said in a trembling voice, "I hitchhiked to get here. Please reconsider. You're making a mistake and we belong together." I shook my head. "I don't want to move and get married. I'm sorry, but it's over. We got along so well. It'd work. We'd have a good life." My father appeared behind me, clearing his throat. "You'd better go." Harry stared, his hands fidgeting at his side. "Can I at least get a glass of water and use the bathroom?" My father said, "No, go home. That's all we have to say." Harry looked down and sighed. He turned away, his thin shirt and jeans looking more worn and threadbare than usual, and he trudged away. My father closed the door and frowned. "He needs a decent shirt and pants." "But he's poor," I said. "He can't help it." "I was poor once too. He should at least wear a clean shirt." About a year later, my high school friends and I attended a talk given by a man from Harry's town, and I went up to him after the crowd thinned. "Do you happen to know Harry by chance?" He furrowed his brow and studied me. "Yes, I know him. You must be the one who left him." I winced. "Is he doing okay?" Last I saw him, he was standing by the side of the road in the rain with his red-headed girlfriend, and I gave them a ride. I'd like to talk with my father and hear his thoughts about what happened when Harry came to our house, but my dad died, and our shared memories are dust. One day that summer, Harry bent over to kiss me by the river just as my parents puttered past on their sailboat. My dad turned his head and gaped. In my mind, Harry will be forever about to kiss me by the river. But he's also standing in the rain with his red-headed girlfriend, and I'm the cruel one who wouldn't open the screen door to give him water. Chapter 7. Retort. 3 days after my father passed away, I came upon information about his pacemaker's model number and manufacturer. I was about to throw it away, but my mother happened to see it and said, "Maybe someone else can use it." I called the funeral home, where my dad was about to be cremated, and told them my father had a pacemaker. My mother thought maybe someone else could use it. A woman on the other end of the line said, "We didn't have that information. It was left off the intake form for some reason." She took down the details about the pacemaker's model and serial number and said, "If we hadn't caught that in time, our brand new state-of-the-art expensive retort would have blown up, and that wouldn't have been good." I hung up and told my mother the news. Given my dad's history of making medical equipment malfunction in his later years, his body blowing up the retort would have been a fitting, unfortunate ending. Chapter 8. Kidneys. The ultrasound technician moved a wand over my pregnant belly, and I watched the display screen, frowning. I wasn't an expert, but it looked like she was focusing on my kidneys. There were definitely 2 of them. She finished moving the ultrasound and stood, turning the display screen away from me and tapping on a keyboard. I covered myself with crinkling blue paper, and my husband, who had taken time off work for the ultrasound, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. His brown eyes rested on mine, and he smiled. The technician said, "Have you had an ultrasound before during this pregnancy?" I shook my head. "No, this is the first one." She tapped away, and I craned my neck to see the screen, where she was still looking at my kidneys. She glanced at my husband. "You may want to sit down for this." He shrugged and flashed a smile. "I'm fine." I bit my lower lip, worrying about what she might say. Was something wrong with our baby? She looked at us. "Are you aware you're having twins?" My pulse raced and a wide smile spread across my face. I beamed at my husband and he grinned. He said, "2 of them?" The technician smiled. "Yes." We thanked her and left, walking hand in hand toward our doubly blessed future. Chapter 9. Canon. My son was visiting, and we walked to the top of a viewpoint overlooking Cap Sante Marina and the town of Anacortes. We were taking in the view when a woman behind us said in a quiet voice, "Fire in the hole." I whipped my head around and saw a man and woman in their late 70s standing by a cannon on wheels. The mouth of the cannon was aimed at us. I said, "What are you doing?" The older grizzled man said, "Watch out, we're going to light it." His co-conspirator, who appeared to be his wife with a matching age and size, said in a matter-of-fact voice, "Step aside." My son and I looked at each other with raised eyebrows and moved away. Buddy, our Beagle Mix rescue dog, wasn't happy because he'd been sniffing a special spot at the top. The couple didn't call out a warning to others. They lit the fuse. Boom, bam, the cannon went off, and the ground shook beneath my feet. My dog yipped. I flinched, and we hoofed it down the hill as if pursued by an angry mob. A week later, I heard the cannon go off by the marina. It seemed the hobby of the cannon enthusiasts required frequent firings, at festivals, at the viewpoint, and at the marina on Fridays at 5 o'clock. Walking my dog, I took to taking furtive glances around corners and behind my back, especially if I was relaxed at a particularly beautiful spot. They were lurking in the park, at the top of the viewpoint, ready to fire into my son's back at any moment. Finally, I spoke with a neighbor who was a veteran, and he said the sudden cannon explosions rattled him. reminding him of serving in the war. I mentioned I was jolted by the cannon blasts in town and suggested he tell someone down at City Hall, because we probably weren't the only ones traumatized by the Friday 5 o'clock cannon firings. Sometime after that, silence became our friend, and only the sound of the breeze could be heard on Fridays at 5 in the afternoon. Chapter 10. Needle. "Baby B has the needle," a man said. "Stop, don't do anything." My pulse quickened. Moments before, my twins had been swimming around in my womb, and a doctor slowly inserted an amniocentesis needle. My son grabbed it and held on. "I've never seen this before. This is a first." I tried to calm my racing heart. Something about the procedure was making me feel nervous, and my hands were sweaty. The length of the needle was a big part of the problem. It was so long, it looked like it could stretch all the way to the moon. "Okay, baby B let go. We can proceed." Doctors recommended the test, and in the end, nothing alarming was revealed, except that I hate the sight of really long needles piercing my flesh. My son grew up with a love of sticks, and he picked them up at the beach, on walks and wherever he went. Perhaps that behavior started in the womb. Or maybe not. Chapter 11. Toilet paper roll. I sat in the teacher's lounge sketching on my lunch break, where I worked in a high school library as an aide. I recommended On the Road to students to read, and our copies were soon stolen. We bought more to encourage reading. A man in his 40s who worked at the school tapped a finger on the table, while I continued to draw. He said, "There's only one way to put a roll of toilet paper on the holder." I glanced up from my colored pencil sketch. "What do you mean?" He held up his hands. "Everyone knows this. It shouldn't be a point of discussion. But it was with my ex-wife. You put it on the holder so paper goes down the back." I wrinkled my brow. "That's not how I do it. It comes out in front." He shook his head, jabbing a finger at me. "No way. People shouldn't do that." "Sounds like there are a few ways to do it." He stood. "Well, there shouldn't be. That was part of the reason we got divorced. Plus that time she held a knife over my head while I was sleeping. I woke up in the night, saw the sharp blade in her hand, and that did it." I winced. That'd do it for me. He cocked his head and pointed to my abstract sketch. "Why do you do that anyways?" "Do what?" "Scribble on those pages with pencils." I shrugged. "It feels good to draw. It's something I love to do." He mumbled, "Whatever," and left the teacher's lounge. I shook my head, knowing we were worlds apart and would remain that way, and went back to drawing. Chapter 12. University District Street Fair. I was 5 months pregnant and taking a nap on a vacant band platform at the University District Street Fair in Seattle. Fatigue washed over me, and I left my husband in charge of my booth. The car was parked too far away to walk to it for a short nap. I set my water bottle down and dozed off. Voices close to me woke me. A man said, "What's in her water bottle? Tequila?" A few guys laughed. I kept my eyes closed and hoped they'd move on to some other target. The first one said, "Let's piss on her." I sat up and glared. "I'm pregnant. Leave me alone. I'm working the fair and taking a break." 2 guys in their late teens jeered at me, pointing and laughing. A young woman wearing dark eyeliner, a black leather jacket and a short black shirt tugged on the leader's elbow. "Come on, let's go." He yanked his arm away and stared at me, like I was a target for misplaced anger. I stood and clenched my fists, brandishing my water bottle as a weapon. This fair was notoriously crowded, where lanes were clogged with people. But I'd managed to find an out-of-the-way spot, which I now regretted. My gaze flicked over the almost empty parking lot. The nearest person, other than these hoodlums, were 15 yards away. The leader glared and took a step toward me. I said in my most threatening voice, "No one bothers a pregnant woman. What's wrong with you?" I pointed to the street. Go on, get out of here, or I'll call the cops and report you." "Come on," Ms. Leatherjacket said, pulling at his hand. He gave me one last sneer and strode away. Motioning to his friends, he said, "Let's go." I stood there trembling, watching them leave the parking lot. The smell of fried food hung heavy in the air. I sucked in a deep breath, patted my belly, and went the other way back to my booth. I never saw those creeps again, and I hope now that they're older, if they're even still alive, they feel ashamed of themselves every time that memory flashes through their minds, which it should, but it probably doesn't. I enjoy studying human behavior and writing about weird people, but I can't fathom why they were acting aggressive and verbally abusive to a sleeping woman. Maybe they'll wake up one day, realize how vile they were, and experience scorching self-retribution and burning shame. Chapter 13. Social Studies. I don't know what possessed me, but I wrote a note to my friend in 7th grade social studies class and folded it up, passing it to her through people from several seats back. Mr. McMillan, who had the broad-shouldered build of a football player, stopped lecturing and walked over to my friend, taking the note from her hand. "I'll take that." My friend turned in her seat and gaped at me, my body flushed with heat. Our teacher said, "The punishment for passing notes in class and not paying attention is for me to read the note aloud." My cheeks heated hot enough to fire a pottery kiln. I had a forest fire blazing inside. My armpits pricked with sweat. I wiped my sweaty upper lip. Mr. McMillan unfolded the note, read it to himself, and gazed at me. Looking over the class, he said, "Here's what it says, and remember not to do this again unless you want everyone in class to hear it." Holding the dreaded note higher in the air, he read in a high-pitched voice, "I have the biggest crush on Xavier. I love his sexy low voice." Everyone laughed and turned to look at me, whispering behind their hands. I stared at the floor, studying scuff marks. My face was a furnace. I had to get out of here. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of class. Out in the hall, Xavier, my crush and a trumpet player in the band, brushed past. I looked up at him, hoping he'd be delighted to hear I was interested in him, but he snarled at me and said one word, "Slut." I gasped and hurried to the bathroom, hiding there a long time. I wasn't sure what the word meant, but it sounded mean. I looked it up in a dictionary at home, but didn't find it, so it took a while for me to figure out what he meant. I'm not sure why he said that to a red-faced, mortified girl standing in the hall filled with hope, and my only guess is he was harboring hidden simmering resentment from something that happened 2 years earlier. A carnival came to town when we were in 5th grade, and a boy who played French horn asked me to go with him. I would have preferred to go to the carnival with Xavier, but he didn't ask me. Back then, in the 1960s, girls didn't ask boys out, and only boys could be safety boys, acting as volunteer crossing guards before and after school. I went on the Ferris wheel and other rides with the French horn player, who asked me to go steady. I said yes, excited more by the daring idea than what it might mean. And he gave me a metal ID bracelet to wear, which I hid at home under the base of a lamp. My parents had no idea of the turbulence tearing through their daughter's life. Chapter 14. Watering Can. I carried an urgent document to the Chief Executive Officer's corner office. My boss, head of corporate communications and investor relations, told me to place the important papers on the executive's chair so he'd see them right away. But as I approached the office, I noticed a man in his early 30s standing at the desk by an empty executive chair, reading papers left there. He wore a green apron, and in his right hand he held a watering can. I said, "Hello?" He jerked around, looked at me, and strode over to a potted plant in a corner, watering it for a few seconds. He walked out with his head turned away from me. I set the documents down and told my boss what had happened. Security looked into the incident and discovered a high-powered telescope in a hotel room across the street was trained on our top executive's desk. They couldn't pin down who rented the room and set up the telescope, but we had a case of corporate espionage on our hands. Rumors flew about a possible merger, and many months later, the company was bought out. As far as I know, no one found out who was watching the chief executive's desk in the corner office and reading documents from across the street. Was the guy with the watering can aligned with the telescope spies? Or was he a separate sleuth? We'll never know, which is why I write mysteries and thrillers, to explore questions like that and offer answers in fictional worlds. Chapter 15. What instrument do you play? A birthday party for a percussion player was in full swing on my trumpet-playing boyfriend's back deck. 2 trombone players were mixing up special margaritas. They ran out of ice, and I hurried to a convenience store, lugging back cold bags. In the living room, a young woman was eating Twinkies from a stack on a serving platter, and Jerry's basset hound tipped over the glass coffee table in an attempt to consume liver pâté. I had just sat down on a porch swing out back, and the party swirled around me, when a tall man came over and said, "What instrument do you play?" My eyebrows shot up. I was in my early 40s, but I hearkened back to my junior high days and said with a smile, "Flute." He nodded. That makes sense. I later learned that woodwind players often match up with brass players, like when I played flute in junior high and had a burning crush on a trumpet player. A pregnant woman stood and diverted our attention, opening her jacket, pulling out an ultrasound and holding it in the air. As far as we knew, no one had invited her. She pointed at the ultrasound and announced the name of the father of her baby, but he wasn't there. A hush fell over the group before conversations resumed. It was one of the strangest parties I've attended, due to Twinkies being offered as appetizers, the dog knocking over the bare coffee table, and an ultrasound being waved around by a stranger. But the margaritas were delicious, and a good time was had by all. Except later that night, after everyone left, I noticed a glass bowl on the dining room table near the front door had been stolen. We never found out who took it. The porch swing I had given my boyfriend as a birthday gift finally wore out. The fabric split, but we didn't. We married, moved to a small town, and now we have a different dog and new patio swing. I wonder how a Twinkie would taste if it was dunked in liver pâté for a weird snack. We almost found out that odd night. The end.